Today we are going to talk about a really dirty word. A word that is so dirty that many of you are gonna stop listening to this recording in shock. Many of you will curse me and moan about me on Facebook or Twitter. Some of you may even write letters. And those of you who had been following me or following these series will stop doing so. Therefore, I want to warn you, if there are any children in the room, they should now leave, because we are about to get dirty, baby. Really dirty. What's this dirty word that I'm going to talk about? Before I say the word, just some context. This word isn't dirty to the public in general, but to many spiritual folk, this word has become tainted. They either use it to mean whatever they want, or they have a bad reaction to it. So much so that many people will tune out when they hear this word. So what's this word? It's a simple 3-letter word. God. G-O-D. God. Not dog, Bobo, but God. Why has this word become so tainted in the modern world? Many spiritual books avoid using the word at all. And if you read the reviews of many books on Amazon, they'll say things like, "Oh, I wanted to read a spiritual book, but they started talking about God, so 1 star." Why is this word so bad? The reason is that over the centuries, last thousands of years, the word God has come to mean something completely different to what it once meant, and what, in my opinion, or in the opinion of many spiritual people, it should mean. The problem is that people who have never even felt God, who have only read about God in a book, their own religious book, are so sure that they know what this word means, even though their idea of God comes from second-hand knowledge that itself is out of date, or even when it was written, it was wrong or out of date. And that's why many spiritual folk prefer terms like being or spirit. But then these have their own meanings, which might be different. Spirit can mean ghost. And many spiritualists, there's a group called spiritualists who claim to talk to dead people. And even in the common people, spirit can mean ghost. Being can mean just human being, and not the pure existence that I mean when I use the word being. And that's the problem with all words. They are prone to misinterpretation, none more so than the word God. The problem with most religion is that people who wrote the books of the religions were not, as far as I can see, very spiritual people themselves. They might have had a few spiritual experiences, but they were not living the spiritual life. That's why Jesus never wrote the Bible or the New Testament. The Buddha never wrote any of his teachings. And in the case of both of these people, their teachings were only written down hundreds of years after their death, by which time the meaning had become corrupted or tainted by people who had no idea of what God or spirituality is. Why is this? Why does the word God get so tainted? I think what most people mean when they use the word God is a vengeful or a controlling father figure who sits in the sky and spends most of his time looking at our sex organs. That's what God is, isn't it? Every time you have a sexual or a dirty thought, God is looking at you and judging you, as if the being that created the whole universe has nothing better to do than look at your private parts and what you're thinking of doing with them. What most people have done is project their own fears, their own ignorance, their own guilt onto an external entity called God. And then when anything goes wrong, they can blame God, or they can just say that's the way it is. Especially when they're judging other people, it gives them the freedom to say, oh, it's not me, it's what my religion says. I have to judge you, I have to stone you. The God that most religions worship is actually the egoic God. By ego here I mean the part of the mind that identifies strongly with the body, that thinks that it is this body, and when this body dies, it will die too. That is the ego. And the ego is a child of fear. It knows that it cannot last, that by design its destruction has been built into it, and that it is fighting the whole universe, just trying to stay alive. So the ego is very fearful. It is full of terror. It's full of hate and anger at the universe that wants to destroy it. And this ego projects its fear and anger onto the outer world. Most of its fears, most of the things that we fear, whether it is death or the loss of our job or income, losing the respect of our peers, losing the love of our close ones, family, wife, children, all of these fears are actually fake. They are but substitutes for the real fear, which is the fear of annihilation the ego has. But the ego is a lot like an insane person, a mad person, a person who forgets who they are every day and is full of hate and anger. But because they've forgotten who they are, they're not sure why they're so full of hate and anger and fear. And so they project this fear on the outer world. I am sad because my girlfriend left me. I am angry because my children or my parents don't respect me. I'm feeling low or I'm feeling tired because I had a tough day at work. My boss doesn't respect me. My parents treat me like children. My own children don't really respect me. Nobody respects me. These are all excuses. That's not what the ego is scared of. It is scared, that's true, it's terrified. It's horribly terrified. But it projects that fear onto the outer world. And onto an entity it calls God, that it has created. I was watching a TV serial recently in which a man is talking to the Hindu goddess Kali, and he says something and the goddess becomes really angry. She's about to, well, it looks like she's about to kill him because she's angry about what he said. Now, if you don't know anything about the goddess Kali, you don't have to. I'm just using this as an example. Kali represents the death of the ego. That's all what all these gods, Hindu gods, they have all represent something, part of the divine. And Kali represents the part of the god, of the divine, that kills the ego. And I thought it quite funny that here's this goddess that supposedly leads to the death of the ego. But on this TV program, they showed her in a very egoic fashion. She's getting angry at what a person says, what this human says, and he says something silly and stupid that's not even angry. That's not worth getting angry over. So here it was that the people who wrote the TV show, they turned this goddess into an egoic person. They thought that because I would get angry when someone spoke to me like that, that's how God would react to. What they don't understand is that once you have gone beyond the ego, and you don't need to be God to do that. Even enlightened beings like Buddhas, but Buddha is anybody who has become enlightened, not just the historical figure of Gautam or Siddhartha the Buddha, but anyone who has become enlightened. And I'm not one of those, before you ask. And I'm talking about people like Eckhart Tolle or Yogananda or any one of those famous teachers. If you look at them, can you imagine them getting angry or something someone said to them? It is the ego that gets angry because the ego is scared. And it is right to be scared because one day it will die. It has to die. If not by enlightenment, then by the death of the body. The ego must die. And so it is right to be fearful, right to be scared of everything, right to lash out at people who threaten it even a little bit. But the problem is that the ego, our ego, assumes that just because we are scared like this and we are willing to attack people who threaten us, that's how God would act as well. And they project their own fears onto an external entity that the mind itself created. And let's be honest, most of these religions worship, or the God as the religions worship, is a mental construct. It's an image that has been created by the mind based on what the mind knows. And because the mind knows fear and anger, that's how most people's God is. It's a God of fear and anger and retribution and punishment. I'll show you, buddy. I'll teach you a lesson. Boy, I'm going to show you, boy. I'm going to belt you, boy. That's the type of God people have created. Because that's how their ego is. They've taken their own dysfunctional relationships either with their parents, especially their father, or their dysfunctional relationship with their own children or their loved ones, wife, husband, and they have projected it into an outside entity. And the mind says, because I get angry at small things, so must God. But no one actually bothers to ask God, hey dude, what do you think? And why should they? Most of these religious people, if they ever actually met God, they wouldn't be happy. They would be really pissed. They might even call him the devil, because this God would refuse to mold itself into the image that their mind wants it to be. So what is God? And I've told you what God isn't. Most people think God is some sort of thing or person, usually a bearded man who sits in the sky and watches the private parts of everyone and is willing to punish us for the smallest of sins. That's a mental God, the God that our minds have created. If you read the original, like the Bible or the Torah, they all say you should not worship an idol. Most people think that means an idol made of stone, but the real idol is an image of God made in our mind, not made of stone, but the image of God that we have made in our mind. That is the real idol. Our angry, vengeful God who just wants to punish us, sits in the sky, is constantly judging us, will send us to hell for the smallest of mistakes. That is an image of God, an idol of God that we have created. In many religions that say that idol worshipping God is bad, that say that worshipping an idol is a sin, they themselves are guilty of worshipping the same idol that they made themselves from their mind. An idol made of stone is not that bad because it can be smashed, it can be thrown away. But how do you get rid of the idol in your mind? That image of God that you have created in your mind and that you worship continuously, or that you hate, because hate is also a form of worship, isn't it? Even if you hate God, you're, in a way, still stuck in the same loop. Watching a few videos by Eckhart Tolle, and a woman asked him, what do I do if I secretly hate God? Because God has been unfair to me and unjust to me in the past. And that's a feeling many people have. They hate God, or their own concept of God, or their own concept of religion. And they don't know what to do about it. So this woman asked Eckhart Tolle, what do I do if I secretly hate God? And Eckhart said that when the mind, it hates something, or when it insults something, it thinks it is bigger than the other person. If I say that, if I find a fault in you, or if I criticize you, I'm thinking that I'm better than you. And criticizing God is the ultimate goal of the ego. Because by criticizing God, you become bigger than God. You can say, haha, so see, God made a mistake. I am better than God. That's what the ego says. Whatever you criticize, your ego feels that it is better than that. So if you're criticizing God, you have become bigger than God. And that's what the ego loves. It loves to become bigger than God. And blaming God for our problems is just another form of not taking responsibility for our life. It's the same as blaming the government or our parents or our children or those evil Wall Street bankers who are evil, I accept, yeah, greedy pigs, but let's not blame them. They work in a system that we created and many of us profit from. So the hate, the distrust many people had of God, this distrust of organized religion, it is a reaction to the mental image of God humanity as a collective has created. If you're born today, even if you're born into a non-religious family, you're still getting these centuries of crap, directly or indirectly, about what God is and should be into your mind. And you just can't say, oh, I don't believe in God. You're living in a world where you're constantly told, this is what God does, this is what God doesn't do. And so even if you're an atheist, you still have a few mental ideas of God. And that's the problem with these ideas. They're mental, they're created by the mind. They're not real, they're illusionary. Like everything else the mind creates, they are temporary and are wrong, because the mind cannot grasp the infinite. God, which some people nowadays call being or spirit or our inner self, our inner teacher, is something beyond the mind. As one of the Upanishads say, it is that which sees through the eyes, but which the eyes cannot see, which hears through the ears, but which the ears cannot hear, which senses through the skin, but which the skin cannot sense, which smells through the nose, but the nose cannot smell, and which analyzes through the mind, but which the mind can never analyze. That is what we call God, and not what people here worship. Now that's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That consciousness that uses the mind, uses the eyes, uses the ears, but which the eyes cannot see, the ears cannot hear, and the mind can never analyze. That is the God that we should worship, and not what the people here worship. The funny or sad thing is, of course, that if you go to modern India, they don't worship this God of the Upanishads. They worship, like the Christians and the Muslims and the Buddhists, they worship their own mental idea of what God should be. So God or spirit or being, whatever you want to call it, it's a form of consciousness that is beyond the senses, even beyond the mind. If ever you think you've understood God or a being, then you are mistaken by definition, because by definition the mind cannot grasp it. It is beyond the mind. It is like using some sticks you found on the side of the road to build a quantum, electron microscope. Electron microscope can see the lowest atom, right? But if you just pick up some stones and sticks on the side of the road and try to build an electron microscope, no matter how much you try, you'll never succeed. It's the same with the mind. By definition, the mind cannot grasp the infinite, the unknown, the quantity we call God. And what most people think of God is just their own mental idea. That's why it's useful to sometimes not use this word. Just use the word being or spirit or consciousness. But like I said, they have their own problems. This leads to more questions. If God isn't the dude in the sky, what is it? Why is there so much injustice in the world? Why doesn't God fix it? Well, if you accept that God is not some micromanager sitting in the sky, you must also accept that the problems of this world are not caused by God. I think Marianne Williamson said this best. She said, people say, oh, if there's a God, why would you let thousands of children starve a day? To which Marianne said, it's not God that does that, it's we who do that. Directly or indirectly, by not caring about the problems of the world, by not giving a damn, by being so focused on ourselves and our own mind. Another thing you have to accept, that if you accept that God is pure being that lives, exists in us, if you accept that, then you also have to accept that we are not passive victims of fate. We are not helpless little children. Ooh, what do we do? God is going to punish me. Ooh. We are not like that. We are active co-creators with God. Because deep in our hearts, we are all God. There is no difference between us and that. That's why the Upanishad said, I am that. Even Moses, when he met God for the first time, God said, I am that I am. And here that means all that, everything around us, trees, the sky, the clouds, the grass, the earth, the sky, everything, including us. We are all God. We all have a part of God. In our case, like madmen, we have forgotten who we are. And because of this concept called the ego, we have started to think we are this body, that we are limited, that we are not perfect. And that is the biggest sin. To limit ourselves, to believe we are limited and not perfect creations of a perfect being. So the next time you want to feel like blaming God, remember, you are God. You've forgotten who you are. But that makes absolutely no difference to who you are. You still are God, even though you may have forgotten it. So the next time you feel depressed or sad or low, just take a deep breath. Deep breath in, deep breath out. And remember who you are. Your being, your spirit, your God. You're a creation of perfection. You are perfection. And God is closer to us than our breath. So deep breath. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.